It is the evening of Wednesday, March 11th, 2026. And if you just take a look around you, the world has fundamentally changed in just under 2 weeks.
Dramatically.
Yeah, gas prices are absolutely skyrocketing, global markets are reeling, and the Middle East is engulfed in a sprawling, unprecedented conflict. Today, our mission is to cut through that heavy fog of war.
Right, because there is a lot of noise out there right now.
Exactly. So we are taking a massive stack of fresh sources, literally days and days worth of YouTube geopolitical analyses, deep dive interviews with military experts, real-time conflict trackers, and we are breaking down exactly what is happening right now, why it's happening, and crucially, how it's going to impact your daily life in the coming weeks.
And we should note, we are pulling from a very wide spectrum of material here. We've been poring over insights from military strategists, former intelligence analysts, economic professors.
Across the board.
Yeah, across the board. The goal here isn't to take sides in what is obviously a highly charged conflict. Rather, it's to give you the objective aerial view. We are strictly unpacking the facts, the military strategies, and the global economic implications exactly as they're presented by the experts on the ground and the analysts watching the satellite feeds.
Because you really do need to care about this. I mean, if you're wondering why a waterway 7,000 miles away matters to your morning commute or your grocery bill, we are going to connect those dots today.
It's all connected.
It really is. This isn't just a distant geopolitical chess match playing out on a screen. This conflict is directly tied to the price of your food, the stability of your retirement accounts, and the future of the technology you use every single day.
Let's start by tracing it back to the inciting incidents. A little over a week ago, we saw the launch of Operation Epic Fury. This involved a massive, highly coordinated wave of U.S. and Israeli airstrikes. And the primary result of those strikes was the assassination of Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, along with numerous top commanders of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC.
But the sources we looked at are very clear that this wasn't just, a sterile precision military operation that only hit leadership compounds.
From it.
There was a devastating civilian toll. The analyses we reviewed mapped out the collateral damage, and it is extensive. The strikes hit the Gandhi and Khatam al-Anbiya hospitals in Tehran.
Which is just horrific.
Yeah. They leveled UNESCO heritage sites like the Golestan Palace and Chel Satoon. And tragically, a girls' school in Vinab was struck. We are talking about a decapitation strike on a scale that is basically unprecedented in modern history, with an enormous human cost.
And the explicit goal of a strike that massive, at least as debated by the military planners we've been listening to, is to completely shatter the Iranian leadership.
The theory being that if you remove the apex of the power structure, the government will collapse from the top down.
Exactly. But the internal Iranian response has completely contradicted what Western analysts expected. I mean, almost immediately after the strikes, the Assembly of Experts in Iran convened. They didn't fracture. They elected Mojtaba Khamenei, Ali Khamenei's son, as the new supreme leader.
Right, and the immediate reaction from Western politicians was to just dismiss this. You had sound bites everywhere calling it a hereditary monarchy, using it as proof that the Iranian system is weak or desperate.
Which completely misses the nuance of their political structure.
That's what the geopolitical analysts who actually study Iran's constitution are saying. They break this down very differently. The Assembly of Experts isn't just a rubber stamp for a royal family.
No, they actually have the constitutional power to choose the leader, and theoretically they even have the power to remove him.
Right, it's a defined institutional mechanism, and it kicked into gear exactly as it was designed to.
We also really have to look at the tragic, deeply personal context of Mojtaba stepping into this role. During the bombings that killed his father, Mojtaba also lost his mother, his wife, and his son.
It's hard to even fathom that level of loss.
He's taking control of a nation at war while absorbing a staggering amount of personal grief. And his profile, even before this happened, is significant. He has long been viewed as a hardliner.
Yeah, the sources noted he was one of his father's absolute closest advisors behind the scenes.
And he has incredibly deep, long-standing ties to the IRGC.
Which brings up a terrifying pivot point for the entire region. The elder Khamenei had a specific religious fatwa, a binding theological ruling against the development of nuclear weapons.
It was a theological barrier to weaponization that he imposed on the country.
Exactly. But Moshe Papa Khamenei is not bound by that same religious ruling, so he is stepping into power, heavily aligned with the military apparatus, in the middle of an existential war, entirely without that specific theological constraint regarding a nuclear deterrent.
That is a fundamental shift in the regional security dynamic. But it also raises the question of immediate stability. A lot of Western military planners seem to be banking on the idea that if you take out the top guy, the whole system crumbles into chaos.
A classic bottom-up regime change.
Right. Yet the Iranian government hasn't collapsed.
I found the explanation for this in the sources absolutely fascinating. The reason the government is still standing is due to decades of preparation. Analysts point out that the Iranian military and political systems are heavily decentralized. They operate on a doctrine known as a mosaic plan.
The Mosaic Plan. It's brilliant in its grim pragmatism. It was designed decades ago specifically to survive exactly what just happened, a massive decapitation strike.
Because in a traditional, highly centralized military, if you cut off the head, the body dies. Communication stops. Orders stop.
But the Mosaic Plan flips that entirely. Command and control don't just vanish when the supreme leader or top generals are killed. Authority immediately and automatically delegates to regional commanders.
So these local leaders already know their operational orders.
Exactly. They don't need to wait for a phone call from Tehran to know how to fight back. The entire system was engineered to absorb this exact shock and keep functioning independently.
It's like trying to shut down the internet by blowing up one server farm. The network just reroutes.
That's a great way to put it.
But what about the civilian population? There was this pervasive expectation in the West that the Iranian people, who have obviously had deep grievances with their government, would use this moment of chaos to rise up and overthrow the regime.
And this is where a political science professor in our sources broke down the psychology of war in a way that completely shifts how you view these conflicts. The theory of bottom-up regime change achieved by bombing a country historically fails almost every single time.
Right. The professor pointed to the U.S. bombing of Libya in 1986.
The goal there was to take out Muammar Gaddafi and inspire an uprising. It didn't cause a popular revolt, it caused a massive nationalist backlash.
Because when a foreign power bombs a country, it introduces what the professor called a third actor into the domestic dynamic. Before the bombs fall, you basically have two actors, the regime and the society.
And there might be a massive hostile gap between them.
Exactly. The society might deeply resent the regime, but the second a foreign military starts dropping bombs, destroying civilian infrastructure, and inevitably killing civilians like the girls at the school in Manab, that foreign power becomes the third actor.
And historically, the introduction of that third actor changes everything. Instead of causing the population to align with the foreign bombers against their own leaders, the bombs infuse the society with intense nationalism.
It fuses the people and the regime closer together against a common external enemy.
The civilian population might not love their government, they might actively protest them in peacetime, but they absolutely do not want to be ruled, occupied, or destroyed by a foreign power.
It's the ultimate unifying force. So if the political objective of collapsing the regime from the inside has failed, we have to look at the military objectives. The U.S. and Israel went in with overwhelming, unprecedented force.
Overwhelming force.
And this leads directly into a concept that kept coming up across multiple military analyses. They call it the smart bomb trap.
The smart bomb trap is vital to understanding the current quagmire the coalition finds itself in. It unfolds in three distinct phases. Phase 1 is hyperconfidence.
And to be fair to the military planners, this confidence is rooted in actual, undeniable tactical successes. The U.S. and Israel deployed the most advanced, precise weaponry in the history of human conflict.
Right. They largely destroyed Iran's air defenses and radar systems. They achieved total air superiority very quickly. They successfully bombed major, heavily fortified nuclear facilities like Fordo and Natanz.
When your precision bombs are hitting their targets 90% of the time, and the satellite imagery shows enemy buildings turning to dust exactly when you want them to, it creates an incredibly seductive illusion of control. You feel like you can achieve any strategic goal because the technology works perfectly.
But then comes Phase 2.
Phase 2, strategic failure.
This is where the tactical brilliance of a precision airstrike hits a brick wall of reality. Despite dropping these incredible munitions, despite destroying the physical buildings of the nuclear sites, literally turning subterranean facilities like Fordo into rubble, The U.S. and Israel did not secure the actual prize.
The enriched uranium is missing.
It's missing, and the math here is terrifying. The sources break down what Iran actually possesses right now. We are talking about roughly 1,000 pounds of 60% highly enriched uranium and another 10,000 pounds of lower-grade uranium.
According to the nuclear experts interviewed, that is enough raw material to fashion anywhere from 10 to 16 nuclear bombs, depending on their technical proficiency.
And this material wasn't just sitting in one easily bombable warehouse waiting to be struck.
Not at all. In anticipation of these strikes, because Iran knew they were coming, they dispersed this material into what analysts call penny packets.
Penny packets.
Yeah. This highly enriched uranium has been scattered across hundreds of unknown, deeply hidden locations throughout the entire country.
So the trap springs shut. You can have total air superiority. You can bomb every known military facility, every command bunker, every radar dish to dust. But if you don't know where the uranium is, you haven't solved the strategic problem at all.
In fact, you've actually just accelerated the timeline of the threat, because now that material is out in the wild, being moved around by a decentralized military apparatus, that mosaic plan we talked about that just saw its top leadership assassinated and has no religious fatwa holding it back.
And while this strategic failure is solidifying, the reality on the ground for the U.S. military is starting to leak out. And it completely contradicts the official optimistic narratives we've been hearing on the nightly news.
For days, the official line was that the war was almost over, a surgical, total success.
But sources confirm the Pentagon recently had to admit to around 140 U.S. troops wounded.
Which completely validates earlier, really dark leaks we saw coming out of military hospitals in Germany. At places like Landstuhl, they were reportedly canceling childbirths for pregnant servicewomen just to make room in the wards for a massive influx of combat casualties.
They were putting out urgent, beast-wide calls for blood drives.
That is not the footprint of a clean, remote control war.
It reveals a massive disconnect between the victory narrative being sold to the public and the escalation reality happening in the theater. We also saw reports of massive friendly fire incidents in the sheer chaos of the contested airspace.
Right. There's a confirmed incident where Kuwaiti air defenses, deeply on edge and tracking hundreds of bogies, accidentally shot down 3 U.S. F-15 fighter jets.
The fog of war is incredibly thick, and it's lethal even to the coalition.
And this brings us to another critical issue the military analysts highlighted: exhausted targets. You can only bomb the IRGC headquarters so many times before there's nothing left but a crater.
Precisely. One analyst noted that within a couple of weeks, the coalition will cross a threshold they called the Rubicon. They will have completely exhausted their target bank.
Every known radar, every known bunker, every airstrip will be gone.
At that point, they will be reduced to, as the grim military phrase goes, making the rubble bounce. They will be dropping multi-million-dollar precision munitions on already destroyed concrete, achieving absolutely zero strategic gain while continuing to risk pilots and drain resources.
Which brings us to the terrifying phase 3 of the smart bomb trap. If you can't bomb your way to the uranium because it's in 100 different caves and basements, what is left?
Phase 3 is the realization that the only way to physically secure that unaccounted-for nuclear material is to put boots on the ground. It forces a transition from an air war to a ground invasion.
And the sources are unanimous on how impossible that task is. We are talking about invading, occupying, and controlling a hostile population of 92 million people.
Let's give some context on that. Think back to Iraq in 2003. Iraq was roughly 25 million people during the invasion. The U.S. went in with over 150,000 troops and spent a decade struggling to maintain control, suffering thousands of casualties in a grueling counterinsurgency.
Iran is massively larger than Iraq. And it's not just the population size, it's the geography. Iran features incredibly harsh, mountainous terrain specifically suited for guerrilla warfare and hiding small penny packets of material.
The logistical reality of a ground war there is staggering. To secure Iran, to actually go building to building, mountain pass to mountain pass, looking for those dispersed uranium caches would require hundreds of thousands of combat troops. Millions, potentially, to actually pacify the country.
These are forces the United States simply does not have available in its active duty roster, nor does the political will exist to draft them and deploy them into what would undoubtedly be a catastrophic, drawn-out meat grinder of an occupation.
It is, by every metric the analysts use, military suicide.
So the U.S. is fundamentally stuck. They own the skies, but they can't secure the ground or the uranium. But here's where the narrative of this conflict flips completely. While the U.S. is stuck trying to figure out how to win a traditional vertical military conflict with bombs and planes, Iran has launched a completely different kind of offensive.
One aimed directly at the soft underbelly of the West, our wallets.
Yes, this is perhaps the most globally disruptive aspect of the entire war. Iran understood immediately that they could not win a symmetric head-to-head conventional war against the United States military budget. So they pivoted to what strategists call horizontal escalation.
Instead of fighting the U.S. vertically trying to match stealth bomber for stealth bomber, they spread the conflict horizontally to prolong the war and target the fragile global economy.
And the absolute crown jewel of that horizontal strategy is closing the ultimate choke point, the Strait of Hormuz.
If you aren't familiar with the geography, the Strait of Hormuz is a narrow waterway between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman. It is, without exaggeration, the jugular vein of the global energy market.
The sources note that 20% of the world's global oil supply travels through this single, narrow strait. And it's not just oil. Over 25% of the world's liquid natural gas, or LNG, is shipped through there as well.
It is the single most important economic waterway on the planet. If it closes, the global economy goes into cardiac arrest. Now, there were initial reports and rumors, heavily amplified by U.S. intelligence sources, that Iran was physically laying underwater mines in the strait to blow up ships.
Right.
But several analysts point out that Iran doesn't even need to physically mine the water to close it.
What blew my mind in these sources is the mechanism of how you close a strait without actually touching the water. It's all about the sheer threat of asymmetric warfare and insurance actuaries.
Insurance actuaries, exactly.
Iran has an arsenal of anti-ship ballistic missiles, swarms of suicide drones, and fast attack craft stationed all along their coastline, which borders the entire northern edge of the strait. All they have to do is announce that the strait is an active war zone and point their targeting radars at a few commercial vessels.
The moment those radars lock on, or a single warning drone is launched, the global maritime insurance companies, the syndicates at Lloyd's of London, instantly react. They refuse to issue insurance policies.
Or they raise the premiums to astronomically unprofitable levels for commercial tankers entering the Gulf.
Without insurance, shipping companies simply will not risk sending their $100 million vessels and cargo into a shooting gallery. The strait experiences what's called a soft closure.
There's no physical barricade, but traffic just halts entirely.
And the impact of that halt was instantaneous. The financial analysts in our sources trace the immediate shockwaves. Before the war started, oil was sitting around $67 a barrel. Within days of the airstrikes and the soft closure of the strait, the panic set in, and oil spiked to over $120 a barrel.
And some prominent financial research firms are projecting a worst-case scenario where it could hit $150 a barrel by the summer.
So we have to trace what a $120 or $150 barrel of oil actually means for your day-to-day life. It is a devastating, invisible economic tax on everything you consume.
Let's follow the supply chain on this. Think about the last time you bought groceries. A $150 barrel of oil means gas prices in places like Los Angeles are hitting $8 a gallon, maybe higher. But it's not just the pain at the pump for your commute. Oil is baked into the cost of every single good that is transported by truck, ship, or plane.
The diesel for the delivery truck bringing the strawberries to your grocery store just doubled in price.
Exactly. The plastic container holding those strawberries is made from petroleum. Its cost just spiked.
It guarantees a massive resurgence of sticky, unyielding inflation right when consumers thought the post-pandemic economy was finally stabilizing. And it goes deeper than transportation and plastics. The petrochemicals that come out of the Gulf are essential for manufacturing everything from advanced microchips to pharmaceuticals.
And critically, agriculture. The Gulf is a massive global exporter of urea and sulfur, which are foundational chemical components for global agriculture. With those supplies cut off and trapped behind the Strait of Hormuz, fertilizer costs are going to absolutely soar.
When fertilizer costs soar, farmers can't afford to use as much, which means crop yields drop. Lower supply and higher input costs mean the price of food at your local grocery store skyrockets.
It is a cascading economic failure that starts with a drone in the Persian Gulf and ends with a $12 loaf of bread in Ohio.
But Iran didn't stop at just passively closing the strait to international shipping.
Right.
They actively targeted the Gulf allies. We're talking about direct strikes on the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Kuwait.
These are nations that host major U.S. military bases and logistics hubs.
But Iran didn't just hit the military bases. They intentionally hit critical civilian and economic infrastructure.
They hit desalination plants, For these desert nations, desalination plants provide the actual drinking water. Destroying them is an existential threat. They hit major oil refineries, like the Ruwais refinery in the UAE and Bapco in Bahrain, causing massive structural damage.
This forced these countries to declare force majeure, a legal clause excusing them from fulfilling contracts due to an unavoidable catastrophe, and halt their own energy exports entirely.
And this brings us to a really sophisticated, almost diabolical layer of Iran's strategy. Some financial analysts and the sources call it the follow the money thesis. To understand why Iran is targeting these specific countries, and specifically their infrastructure, you have to understand the massive, unstated economic motivation behind recent U.S. policy in the Middle East.
This was one of the most eye-opening parts of the deep dive. The United States is currently in a desperate existential race to dominate the global artificial intelligence boom. To build the massive data centers, buy the millions of specialized microchips, and power the electrical grid required for AI, you need trillions of dollars in capital.
The U.S. administration was heavily courting the Gulf states, specifically their massive multi-trillion-dollar sovereign wealth funds, to secure that capital. They were trying to lock in trillions of dollars in investments from places like Saudi Arabia and the UAE to exclusively fund American tech companies.
It's essentially an AI investment pipeline.
And Iran is fully aware of this pipeline. The sources detail how Iranian drones specifically targeted Amazon Web Services or AWS data centers in the UAE and Bahrain. They didn't hit them by accident.
No, Iranian state media was explicit about targeting the digital backbone of these countries.
So basically, the U.S. government goes to the Gulf with its hat in its hand asking for $1 trillion to build ChatGPT-6, and Iran just blows up the ATM.
That's a very accurate way to put it. It is a brilliant, highly destructive economic logic. Iran's goal is to make the entire Gulf region an incredibly dangerous, unstable war zone.
By doing so, they force these wealthy Arab nations to change their priorities. They have to divert their sovereign wealth funds away from investing billions into U.S. tech companies like NVIDIA, Amazon, or Microsoft.
Instead, they are forced to spend that money on their own immediate national survival, buying Patriot missile batteries to intercept drones, and spending billions rebuilding their destroyed desalination plants and burning oil refineries.
They are essentially trying to collapse the U.S. AI bubble by cutting off its primary funding source. Every dollar spent fixing a shattered refinery in Bahrain is a dollar not invested in Silicon Valley.
Exactly.
So if the U.S. is bleeding militarily in a trap, the West is bleeding economically with $150 oil, and the Middle East is quite literally on fire, we have to ask. Who is actually winning this war? Because in every global crisis, there are actors standing on the sidelines reaping the benefits.
And right now, the primary beneficiary is undeniably Russia. This war has been an absolute historic windfall for Vladimir Putin.
It's staggering when you look at the math. By closing the strait and forcing Gulf nations to halt production, roughly 20 million barrels of oil were taken off the global market almost overnight. That's what caused the price to skyrocket to $120 a barrel.
The sources estimate that this price surge has handed Russia, who is still pumping and selling oil on the shadow market, an estimated $40 to $50 billion in extra, completely unexpected revenue in just a matter of days.
They are literally funding their ongoing war in Ukraine, keeping their domestic economy afloat, and rearming their military with the windfall profits generated by the U.S. and Israel going to war with Iran. They haven't had to lift a single finger in the Middle East to reap this massive strategic reward.
And Russia is playing extreme hardball with this new leverage. There is a fascinating anecdote in the sources regarding India that perfectly illustrates this.
India is part of the BRICS economic alliance, along with Russia, China, and Iran. Before this war broke out, India was buying heavily discounted Russian oil. But when the U.S.-Israel strikes began, India initially sided with the West in their diplomatic statements, largely abandoning their BRICS partner, Iran.
Right, but then the Strait of Hormuz closed. And India relies on the Gulf for a massive percentage of its daily energy needs. Suddenly, their economy was staring down the barrel of an energy shortage. So, a panicked India had to run right back to Russia, essentially begging for more oil to keep the lights on and their factories running.
And Russia's response was ruthless. They immediately stripped India of their friends and family discount. They told the Indian government that since they abandoned Iran and sided with the West, they would now have to pay full market rates, $89 or more a barrel.
It was a brutal diplomatic and economic reality check, demonstrating exactly who holds the power when global energy markets contract.
And what about the other major player on the geopolitical chessboard? China. China is demonstrating what analysts call strategic patience. They anticipated this kind of massive instability in the Middle East and prepared well in advance.
Sources note that China has actively stockpiled a massive 4-month strategic oil reserve. They can weather the immediate price shocks of $120 oil much better than the West, which relies on a just-in-time delivery system.
But it's not just passive stockpiling. There are massive backdoor deals happening right now that are fundamentally reshaping global alliances. Sources report that China negotiated a secret, highly consequential agreement directly with Iran.
The reports indicate that Iran has agreed to allow Chinese oil tankers safe, unimpeded passage through the Strait of Hormuz. They are granting them a diplomatic and military shield through the exact same strait they are blocking Western vessels from entering.
In exchange for this vital energy security, China is allegedly providing Iran with real-time, 24/7 satellite intelligence.
Think about what that means for the fog of war. China is watching every movement of U.S. and Israeli troops, every aircraft carrier strike group, every stealth bomber taking off from a regional base from space, and they are feeding that targeting data directly to the Iranian military.
The U.S. is not just fighting Iran. They are fighting a decentralized adversary armed with superpower-level real-time surveillance.
This extreme pressure leads us to the frantic diplomatic scramble currently happening behind closed doors. The sources highlight a recent, highly publicized phone call between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin.
According to the intelligence readouts and the analysts trying to decode this call, the U.S. is essentially trying to cut a grand bargain out of sheer desperation. The Trump administration is reportedly offering massive concessions to Russia regarding the war in Ukraine. They are willing to reshape the map of Eastern Europe.
In exchange, the U.S. is asking Putin for two things. Stop providing military aid and intelligence to Iran, and stop selling Russian oil to China in a desperate attempt to squeeze Beijing economically and isolate Tehran.
But the Kremlin isn't just taking the deal. The sources describe intense factional fighting inside the Russian government over this exact phone call.
One faction, heavily tied to the economic sectors, the oligarchs, and the central bank, wants to take the U.S. deal. They want to end the Ukraine war on favorable terms, get massive sanctions relief, and resume selling oil to Europe at a premium. They want to return to economic normalcy.
But another powerful faction, the intelligence services, the hardline military commanders, and the foreign ministry vehemently opposes it. They believe Russia's long-term strategic future lies with the global south, with a multipolar order led by China, Iran, and BRICS.
They argue that betraying their allies now, just to help the U.S. escape a catastrophic Middle Eastern quagmire of its own making, would be a fatal long-term strategic error.
And while Russia debates internally, the traditional Western alliance is openly fracturing under the economic pressure. Europe is staring down an existential energy crisis. They were already struggling industrially after losing cheap Russian pipeline gas in 2022.
Now, losing Gulf oil and LNG simultaneously could trigger a severe continent-wide industrial depression. Factories will close, heating bills will become unpayable.
We are seeing unprecedented diplomatic rifts because of this. Spain has publicly demanded that the U.S. remove its military aircraft from Spanish bases, explicitly refusing to be complicit in a war that is destroying their economy.
Meanwhile, other European nations are being dragged directly into the crossfire against their will. Because the UK and US operate out of sovereign bases in Cyprus, Iran has launched long-range drone strikes toward the island.
Now, the UK, France, and Italy are frantically deploying naval frigates and aircraft carriers to the eastern Mediterranean just to shoot down incoming Iranian ordnance and defend Cyprus. The war is spilling over the borders of the Middle East and directly threatening European territory.
It's an absolute geopolitical earthquake, which forces us to pull all these complex threads together and ask the ultimate question: where does this go from here?
We have to look at what happens next in the coming weeks.
The first, most sobering realization from the sources is the impossibility of a quick ceasefire. You have U.S. officials and the administration frequently floating the idea of an off-ramp, telling the public in press conferences that the military objectives are mostly achieved and the war is almost won.
They desperately want to declare victory and pivot away before the economic damage of $150 oil becomes permanent.
But the reality is Iran gets a vote in when the war ends. And we heard directly from the Iranian foreign minister in the translated sources. He explicitly stated that Iran absolutely refuses to negotiate.
Why? Because they cite a history of past betrayals. They point to previous diplomatic efforts where they claim the U.S. attacked them or assassinated figures like Qasem Soleimani right in the middle of diplomatic overtures. They have zero trust in Western promises of de-escalation.
Iran's strategy is not to seek a quick resolution or a face-saving exit. Their stated policy is an eye for an eye, and they are fully prepared, structurally and psychologically, for a prolonged, grinding war of attrition.
They know that time is on their side. Every single week, the strait remains closed, the Western economy bleeds, inflation rises, supply chains break, and intense political pressure mounts on U.S. and European leaders from their own citizens.
But what if the U.S. just keeps bombing? What if they decide to push through target exhaustion and try to completely shatter the Iranian government, regardless of the cost?
That leads us to the ultimate nightmare scenario outlined by the analysts. The threat of a loose nuke failed state.
If the U.S. and Israel continue a relentless air campaign until the Iranian regime completely fractures, regional commanders die, and the state loses control of its territory, they risk turning a nation of 92 million people into a chaotic, failed state. Very similar to what happened in Libya after 2011 or Iraq after 2003.
But the scale is completely different. Libya was 6 million people. Iraq was 25 million. Iran is 92 million. And neither Libya nor Iraq had an advanced, highly enriched nuclear program at the time of their collapse.
Precisely. If the Iranian state collapses, the centralized and even decentralized control over the military vanishes. And crucially, control over those 10,000 plus pounds of enriched nuclear material vanishes with it.
You suddenly have a massive stateless territory the size of Western Europe, ruled by unaccountable regional warlords, radicalized militias, and terrorist proxies, all scrambling to secure those hidden penny packets of highly enriched uranium.
The material would almost certainly be sold on the black market to the highest bidder or fashioned into radiological dirty bombs. By trying to execute a decapitation strike to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, a total regime collapse guarantees that the raw materials for a dozen nuclear weapons fall into the hands of non-state actors that cannot be deterred by traditional military threats.
It is the definition of the escalation trap. Let's summarize the ultimate bind the U.S. is currently in, based on everything the analysts have laid out over the last few days.
The air campaign, no matter how precise or technologically advanced, cannot win the war because it cannot secure the dispersed nuclear material.
A ground invasion is widely considered military suicide given the massive size, population, and unforgiving terrain of the country.
But a withdrawal, just packing up the carriers and leaving without a clear, definitive victory, hands absolute regional hegemony to Iran and delivers a massive economic and strategic victory to Russia and China.
It is a strategic paradox. Every available option seems to lead to a worse outcome than the status quo before the first bombs were ever dropped.
Let's take a breath and recap the staggering reality of what we've covered today. In just the last 2 weeks, a targeted assassination and a highly sophisticated tactical bombing campaign have inadvertently triggered a global economic earthquake.
It has effectively closed the Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most vital trade arteries. It has fueled the Russian war machine with billions in unexpected massive oil revenue.
And it has actively threatened the foundation of the U.S. tech economy by diverting the very sovereign wealth funds meant to build our AI future into buying missile defense systems.
And we really must emphasize again why this matters to you. The volatility you are seeing right now, the sudden painful spikes in your grocery bills, the absolute shock at the gas pump, the wild, terrifying swings in your retirement and stock portfolios, none of this is random.
It is a direct, unbreakable tether to the geopolitical chessboard we just outlined.
Your local economy is currently being held hostage by a conflict half a world away, and the shockwaves are only just beginning to reach your doorstep.
The micro impacts in your life are the macro strategies of global superpowers playing out in real time. But before we sign off, there is a final, deeply provocative thought from the sources that we want to leave you to mull over.
We've talked extensively about all the incredible technology used in this conflict. The stealth bombers, the radar systems, the precision munitions that can drop a bomb down a smokestack from 40,000 feet.
Right. And here's the concept to explore. If the world's greatest superpower can achieve total air superiority in a matter of days, deploy the most advanced, expensive precision weaponry in the history of human conflict and successfully completely decapitate an enemy's leadership structure.
Yet still find itself economically paralyzed, strategically cornered, and completely outmaneuvered by a decentralized adversary employing cheap drones and economic leverage. Has the era of the traditional military intervention officially reached its expiration date?
It's a profound question. Is raw conventional military power, the kind of massive force-on-force engagement we've relied on and funded for a century, simply obsolete in a deeply interconnected, incredibly fragile global economy?
Can you ever truly bomb your way to security when the blowback crashes your own stock market, starves your own supply chains, and funds your geopolitical rivals?
It's something the military colleges, the financial markets, and geopolitical strategists will be debating for decades to come, assuming we navigate the next few weeks successfully.
And we will be right here watching those next few weeks unfold, reading the sources and bringing the analysis to you. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the headlines, don't settle for the simple narratives, and always look for the deeper currents flowing beneath the news. We'll see you next time.
For almost 2 weeks now, the world has been absolutely gripped by this rapidly escalating war with Iran. So in this explainer, we're going to break down how this whole conflict just exploded and what the cascading global consequences look like right now.
Right now, it's Wednesday evening, March 11th. And, if you've been to the gas station lately, checked your stocks, or even just turned on the news, you're already feeling the effects of this. The shockwaves are being felt, well, everywhere.
So that brings us to the big question, right? How did we even get here? How did a series of airstrikes spiral out of control so fast that it's now threatening the entire global economy? To really get that, we have to go back to the very beginning.
Okay, let's rewind. Let's go back to where it all kicked off, which was less than 2 weeks ago on the final day of February. It all starts on February 28th. A huge joint U.S.-Israeli air campaign, they called it Operation Epic Fury, hits targets all across Iran. Within days, the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, is killed. His son, Mojave, is immediately named his successor. And this move, instead of fracturing the regime, it actually galvanized it. Iran's retaliation was incredibly swift. They hit U.S. military bases and major economic hubs all across the Gulf. And then came the move that sent the global economy into a complete tailspin. On March 4th, Iran shut down the Strait of Hormuz. We're talking about the choke point for a fifth of the world's daily oil supply. Just gone. Now, you'd think a conflict like this would heavily favor the overwhelming military power of the United States. But that's just not what we're seeing play out. Instead, experts are pointing to this classic strategic pitfall they call the escalation trap. And here's the core idea, which is kind of wild. While the U.S. can win any single tactical fight, the overall strategic picture is actually getting worse with every move, and it might be playing directly into Iran's hands. This whole thing is built on a military theory called the smart bomb trap. Basically, it's a scenario where the incredible accuracy of our modern weapons creates this illusion of total control, but it ultimately fails to achieve the war's bigger political goals. And this side just lays it out perfectly. See, it all starts with hyper-confidence, this belief that you can just surgically remove a threat from 30,000 feet. And that leads to tactical success. I mean, the strikes were successful. They destroyed facilities, they killed leaders. But then it all ends in strategic failure. Why? Well, because the enriched uranium was scattered in the chaos, not captured. And instead of causing the regime to collapse, the attacks unified the public around a new, even more hardline supreme leader. So the bombs hit their targets, but they missed the entire point. Okay, now let's talk about how this massive strategic miscalculation is hitting all of us right in the wallet. Because the economic effects have been immediate, they've been tangible, and frankly, they've been punishing. Just look at this number. Before this whole thing started, a barrel of oil was $67. Yesterday, it spiked to almost $120. That is a staggering increase, and it is pouring fuel on inflation all over the world. And you can see the direct result right here. I mean, this chart shows gas prices in Germany, but honestly, it could be anywhere. In just 5 days, the price at the pump jumped by over 30%. And this is happening everywhere. From Europe to Asia, it's the same story. But this goes so much deeper than just oil. Critical supply chains are just seizing up. Fertilizer exports from the Gulf stopped right before planting season. Shipments of petrochemicals and sulfur are halted. And that affects everything from plastics to semiconductors. And it's not just oil. Qatar, one of the world's top exporters of natural gas, says it just can't fulfill its contracts. And of course, all this uncertainty is absolutely rattling financial markets. We're seeing major indices drop day after day.
Qatar's energy minister put it in the starkest possible terms just last week. He said, this isn't just some regional energy crisis. This is a direct threat that could bring down the economies of the entire world.
So, with the world economy teetering and the military situation basically deadlocked, where on earth does this go from here? The geopolitical picture is looking more and more fragmented and, frankly, pretty dangerous.
Yeah, there is no united front here. You've got traditional allies like the UK, France, and Germany offering support for the US-Israeli campaign, but then you have others like Spain who have been really vocal in condemning it. This division within Europe just highlights the deep, deep anxiety about where this is all heading.
And if you look at the main players, well, nobody is backing down. The US is demanding Iran's unconditional surrender. Iran has flatly rejected any talks, saying it will never surrender. And all the while, the Gulf states, who are caught right in the crossfire, are publicly criticizing the US for dragging them into this mess without even talking to them first. There's just no off-ramp in sight.
So what's the end game? Well, expert predictions are all over the place. First, you've got some analysts who believe Iran actually holds all the cards now and can dictate the terms of any ceasefire. Then there are others who argue the White House has to find some way to declare victory and get out to avoid even worse economic fallout. A third theory suggests Iran's real goal isn't military victory at all, but economic warfare, to make the Gulf so unstable that all that sovereign wealth stops flowing to the U.S. tech sector. And finally, the danger of this conflict getting even bigger is very real, with threats to close yet another critical shipping lane in the Red Sea.
And this all brings us to the final, really unsettling question. Are we just watching a brutal but ultimately contained regional war? Or are we witnessing the exact moment the interconnected global economic system, the one that has defined the last half-century, finally begins to break apart?